Imagine spending like millions of dollars in 3 full years building this absolutely state-of-the-art community center.
Oh, wow. Yeah, a massive undertaking.
Right. And, you've got the architectural renderings, the demographic studies, the city council approvals. You've done all the math.
You check all the boxes.
Exactly. And then you finally open the doors on launch day, and absolutely nobody walks in, not a single person.
That is just, I mean, it's the ultimate nightmare scenario for any leader, really.
It totally is. And here's the crazy part. It's not because the neighborhood doesn't need the services. It's because, entirely without realizing it, you build your beautiful new center directly across an invisible neighborhood gang line.
Oh, man. A line you didn't even know existed.
Exactly. You build a theoretical masterpiece, but in reality, it's totally inaccessible.
And, the sad thing is it happens constantly.
Constantly. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission here is to take a massive stack of sources, complex texts, field research, detailed notes, and extract the most crucial nuggets of knowledge custom-tailored for you.
Yeah, and today we are really immersing ourselves in this fascinating, incredibly dense piece of source material. It's titled 011 Field Immersion and Contextualized Strategy.
Right, and the core theme we're exploring is exactly what happens when brilliant, boardroom-level strategy violently collides with the unpredictable, messy reality of the street.
And what's crucial to understand up front is that, well, while our source material frames these concepts specifically within the context of Christian mission and ministry leadership, the underlying mechanics are universally applicable.
Yeah, they really are.
We are talking about the fundamental dynamics of human trust networks. I mean, how do communities actually operate under the surface? How do they process trauma, evaluate outsiders, and, decide whether or not to adopt a new idea?
Exactly. Those are universal human constants.
They are.
So whether you are leading a corporate initiative, launching a startup, organizing a nonprofit, or if you're just insanely curious about why certain social movements succeed while others just fail spectacularly, these principles are vital.
Vital for anyone trying to actually get things done.
Right. Every single leader, at some point, has to figure out how to bridge that massive gap between conference room theory and street-level reality.
Because the cost of getting it wrong isn't just a blown budget. I mean, sure, you lose money, but the true cost is the damage done to the very people you are genuinely trying to serve.
Right. The human cost.
Yeah. You breed cynicism, you burn out your team, and you just leave the community more isolated than before you even arrived.
Yeah. So how do we prevent the empty community center scenario? Well, before we can talk about the mechanics of how to properly engage a new neighborhood or a market, we need to look at the root cause.
The real reason these massive failures happen in the first place.
Right. And our research points to one overarching culprit, and that is the danger of the desk.
The desk, yeah.
There's this universal temptation that every strategist, every leader faces, and that is the temptation to plan from a distance.
It is such a seductive temptation, too, because, honestly, planning from a distance feels incredibly productive.
Oh, it really does.
Think about the psychology of a planning meeting. You are sitting in a climate-controlled room. You've got whiteboards everywhere. You're looking at spreadsheets, census data, these nice demographic heat maps.
Oh, yeah, the colorful charts.
Right. You assign roles, you map out KPIs, you design these elegant flow charts. In that environment, the world makes perfect sense. You feel like you have total control over all the variables.
It's clean. It's like a diagnostic environment.
Yeah.
If you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor says, there it is, broken. It's binary.
Exactly.
The desk gives us the illusion that human communities are just as legible as an x-ray. Okay, let's unpack this. This reminds me of an analogy I was turning over in my head while reading through the material.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Planning from the desk is essentially like a master chef designing a menu in a pristine state-of-the-art test kitchen.
Okay, yeah.
They spend like 6 months in this vacuum, perfecting the flavor profiles, measuring ingredients down to the milligram, plating it beautifully. I mean, it is culinary perfection.
Right. A masterpiece on a plate.
Exactly. But then they go to roll out this new menu in the actual local restaurant. And the minute they walk in the door, reality hits.
Things are never what they seem in the test kitchen.
Never. The kitchen is missing half the specialty equipment they used. The local suppliers can't consistently source those rare ingredients. And most importantly, the local customers have completely different tastes.
And different dietary restrictions, different price sensitivities.
Yes. The menu was perfect in theory, but in the reality of that specific neighborhood, it's just utterly useless.
What's fascinating here is that that is a phenomenal way to visualize it. And what happens when the chef realizes the menu won't work?
They usually don't take it well?
No, the initial reaction isn't to change the menu. The reaction is to blame the customers for not appreciating fine dining.
Yes. They just don't get it. They're uncultured.
Exactly, and that brings us to a really heavy critique within our source material, because the desk creates the illusion of clean solutions. When you plan from a distance, we inevitably commit what the text calls abstract ministry,
Abstract ministry.
or, abstract leadership.
Yeah.
When you are operating entirely on secondhand knowledge, which is what reports, statistics, and polished executive summaries actually are, you are dealing with a filtered reality.
Right, someone else's interpretation of reality.
Yeah. And the danger of secondhand knowledge is that it consistently makes us feel vastly more informed than we actually are.
Oh, that's so true.
A spreadsheet doesn't show you a community's generational trauma. A demographic report on average household income, it doesn't reveal local honor codes or unspoken fears or historical resentments.
Right, and yet going back to that term, abstract ministry, it dehumanizes people. We stop seeing them as complex, breathing human beings with deep, tangled histories, and we just reduce them into target demographics.
They just become data points on the whiteboard.
Yeah, they become problems to be solved by our brilliant framework, dehumanizing people into target demographics. That stings, but it's incredibly accurate.
It's hard to hear, but it's vital.
If you just see a neighborhood as a mission zone or a market segment, you aren't actually seeing the people. You're seeing your own project.
Exactly.
And our research introduces a profound counter-concept to this. It's referred to as the theology of presence, or incarnational strategy.
The theology of presence.
Right. Now, this is rooted in the Christian narrative, the idea of the incarnation. The idea that the divine didn't just shout instructions from the clouds, but literally became flesh and moved into the neighborhood.
Right, physical presence.
Yeah. But the source material isn't just presenting this as a religious doctrine. It's presenting it as the ultimate, definitive, strategic blueprint for engagement.
It's a massive paradigm shift, really. It moves incarnation from a purely theological category into a strict methodological imperative.
A methodological imperative. I like that.
Yeah. The argument being made is that if the ultimate authority in the universe chose physical presence over distant management, then human leaders absolutely cannot afford to operate from the safety of an executive suite.
Right. It's essentially saying get out of the office.
Exactly. Because love, in this context, is not just a warm intention. Love is attention. And attention requires physical proximity.
So you have to get out of the test kitchen.
You have to step into the muddy waters. True engagement requires a leader to undergo a process of profound unlearning.
Unlearning is so hard to do.
It is. You have to admit that your general theoretical strategy, no matter how brilliantly conceived it was, simply cannot be applied without deep, localized understanding.
You have to shatter the illusion that you know what a community needs just because you've read their data profile.
Right.
Okay, so let's say a leader buys into this. They realize the desk is dangerous. They tear up the test kitchen menu and they actually go to the neighborhood. They physically arrive.
That's a huge first step.
It is. But our notes make it abundantly clear that simply being there isn't enough. Occupying physical space is just step one. The real challenge is how you behave once you arrive.
Yes. The posture of the leader upon arrival basically dictates everything that follows.
And this brings up the concepts of observation and listening. But what's interesting is the source material doesn't frame these as mere sociological research techniques or like basic focus group strategies.
Right? It goes much deeper.
It elevates observation and listening to the level of spiritual disciplines. It draws this really sharp, almost uncomfortable distinction between looking and seeing.
Yeah, I found that distinction to be one of the most compelling parts of the research, honestly. Looking is described as hurried.
Like skimming.
Yeah, it's what a tourist does. It's casual, transactional, and sometimes it's even intrusive. You look at something to extract information quickly.
Like a transaction.
Right. But seeing is entirely different. Seeing is described as a holy, lingering gaze.
A lingering gaze.
Yeah. It is an act of prolonged attention that inherently honors the dignity of the person or the place in front of you.
It's the difference between scanning a crowd for a friend and actually locking eyes with someone who is actively speaking to you.
Exactly.
And there's a reference here to the biblical book of James 1:19, which says to be quick to hear, slow to speak. Now, usually we hear that as just good advice for not getting into arguments, polite conversation etiquette.
Sure, be a good listener.
Right. But the text frames this as a hardcore operational principle. The order of operations is totally non-negotiable. Hearing must come before speaking. Understanding must precede correction or instruction.
Because if you reverse that order, you aren't communicating. You're colonizing.
Wow,
You are imposing your reality onto theirs.
that is heavy.
Mm.
And there is a remarkably vivid story in our sources that illustrates the catastrophic failure of reversing that order.
Oh, the tutoring program.
Yes, it's about a ministry team, a group of very well-intentioned, well-funded people who arrive in a new, economically depressed neighborhood. They do a quick visual scan.
They just look at the community.
Right, they look. They see visible poverty, they see an under-resourced local school, and they immediately sprint to the solution phase.
They've diagnosed it from the desk, essentially.
Exactly. They launch this massive after-school tutoring and food program. On paper, it is a generous, logical, perfectly tailored intervention.
It's exactly the kind of initiative that gets greenlit in a board meeting, with flying colors.
Oh, totally. But they launch it, and the turnout is abysmal. The community just does not participate.
Crickets.
Now, what is the team's initial assumption? Because they are still operating with a desk mentality, they assume the community is apathetic. They think, wow, we brought them this incredible resource, and they just don't care enough about their kids' education to show up.
Which is such a deeply tragic but incredibly common misdiagnosis.
Right. But here is where the pivot happens. Instead of just packing up, writing a cynical report about neighborhood apathy and leaving, the team actually decides to engage in that lingering gaze.
They finally start seeing.
Yes. They stop pushing the program and they start listening. They literally go sit on the front concrete steps with the parents. They hang out at the local bodegas. They spend weeks just observing the actual rhythm of the streets.
It's a total posture shift.
It is. And through this patient listening, they discover the real barriers. The parents aren't apathetic, not even close.
Oh.
The problem is that the children literally cannot safely walk the 4 blocks to the tutoring program because the route passes directly through a contested zone controlled by older youth gangs.
The basic logistics of physical survival were entirely trumping the offer of educational advancement. I mean, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs in real time.
Exactly. And to layer onto that, as they listened, they realized these parents were exhausted and profoundly distrustful of outsiders.
And for good reason.
Yeah. Why? Because they had seen this exact movie play out a dozen times before. Other nonprofits, politicians, religious groups had come in, set up a photo op, made massive promises, and then vanished the second the grant money dried up or the work got too tedious.
They've been burned.
So the community's lack of participation wasn't apathy at all. It was a highly evolved, learned defense mechanism.
Yeah.
It was rational caution.
And if we connect this to the deeper sociological picture, what the team finally discovered was the story beneath the story.
The story beneath the story.
Yeah, this is a crucial concept for any leader. When you enter a new environment and you ask people a question, they rarely give you just the direct answer.
Right.
Their answers, their hesitations, their body language, their silence, it is all heavily layered with community history, with institutional shame, with past disappointments and, fragile hopes.
It's never just a style answer.
No. That tutoring program failed initially, not because it was inherently bad, but because it unknowingly violated the hidden logic of the neighborhood. It triggered a historical trauma regarding outsiders.
Once the team understood that story beneath the story, they completely pivoted. They realized they couldn't just run a tutoring program. They had to shift to advocacy.
They had to address the actual barrier.
Right. They had to organize safe walking routes with the parents. And more importantly, they had to spend months just building basic relational equity so they wouldn't be viewed as just another group of fly-by-night saviors.
And that requires immense humility, because the source material points out that listening in this context is an act of charity.
Listening as charity.
Yes. It is giving someone the fundamental dignity of being heard before they are evaluated or categorized. And through that deep listening, a leader discovers something essential. They discover what good news actually sounds like to a specific demographic.
Wait, expand on that. What do you mean what good news sounds like? Isn't the core message always the same?
Well, the core substance might be the same, but the resonance is entirely localized.
Okay, I follow.
Like, if you are dealing with a demographic that is profoundly isolated and lonely, good news sounds like belonging and family. But if you take that exact same message to a demographic that is currently being exploited or abused, good news doesn't sound like belonging. It sounds like justice, protection, and liberation.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. For a community drowning in shame, good news sounds like absolute forgiveness and a clean slate. If you don't take the time to listen and diagnose the specific, localized ache of a community, you will end up shouting a version of good news that completely misses their reality.
You're essentially answering a question they aren't asking.
Precisely. And this ties directly into the critique, our source material levels, against the modern obsession with speed.
It was speed, yeah.
We are addicted to speed in leadership. Speed feels like strength. Rapid scaling feels like undeniable momentum. We want to see year-over-year growth, massive launch days, immediate return on investment.
But the research warns that urgency without discernment is just a form of blindness.
Yeah.
It argues that modern organizational culture, and specifically modern ministry culture, frequently confuses motion with maturity. We move at breakneck speed, we organize with ruthless efficiency, and we launch highly visible initiatives.
It looks great on a resume.
It really does. But the reality is that the most significant, enduring breakthroughs almost always require a leader to endure a long, highly inefficient-looking season of just earning trust and observing patterns.
You have to ruthlessly resist the urge to fill every single silence with an imported answer. Our sources use this beautiful phrase, actually. A leader must learn to listen for the local grammar of grief and grace.
The local grammar of grief and grace.
Yes, every single community has its own unique grammar, its own vocabulary and syntax for how it processes pain, how it resolves conflict, and how it accepts help. If you do not dedicate the time to learn that local grammar, everything you say will just sound like disruptive noise.
So we've talked about the danger of the desk and the absolute necessity of this lingering observant presence. But I want to dig into how this is actually structured.
The mechanics of it.
Exactly. Because our research doesn't just offer this up as modern sociological best practice. It roots this entire methodology in a very specific ancient blueprint.
Yes, the biblical precedent.
Right. It points directly to how Jesus operationalized field immersion. There is an extensive granular analysis in our notes of a specific biblical passage, Luke chapter 10.
Right.
This is the moment where Jesus sends out 72 witnesses ahead of him into various towns, and the text pulls out these incredibly tactical, strategic components from this ancient narrative.
It really does treat Luke 10 not just as a piece of inspirational history, but as an architectural blueprint for entering a new community. It is essentially a masterclass in the sociology of prepared presence.
Okay, let's walk through these components because
Yeah.
they are fascinating when you look at them through a strategic lens. First, the text highlights that they're sent 2 by 2.
2 by 2, yeah.
Now, my Sunday school assumption was always that this was just the buddy system. You know, safety in numbers, someone to talk to on the dusty road.
Yeah.
But our research says it's much deeper than that. It's about shared discernment and correcting individual bias.
Absolutely. Think about the mechanics of observation. When you enter a new environment, your own background, your socioeconomic status, your own emotional baggage, all of that acts as a cognitive filter.
Right, you only see what you're conditioned to see.
Exactly. If you go in alone, you are entirely at the mercy of your own blind spots. One leader might look at a community's quiet, reserved nature and completely misread it as hostile rejection.
Because that's what quiet means where they're from.
Yeah. But their partner, who perhaps has a different cultural background, might recognize that exact same quietness as a deep sign of respect for a guest. Sending people 2 by 2 ensures that there are 2 sets of eyes to confirm reality and challenge assumptions.
It keeps you grounded.
It creates a microculture of mutual discernment, rather than tying the entire fate of the mission to one charismatic leader's isolated gut feeling.
That makes so much sense. It's an immediate check on hubris. Okay, the next component. They're sent into homes.
The homes, yeah.
The instruction isn't to go build a stage in the town square and start broadcasting. It's to enter the home. The source material refers to the home as the architecture of daily life. It's where the public performance is dropped.
It is the shift from public platform to intimate hospitality. When you are on a stage, you control the environment. When you enter someone's home, you are stepping into their ecosystem.
You're the guest.
You see the unvarnished reality. You see the familial hierarchies, the hidden burdens, who is actually listened to at the dinner table and who is ignored. It requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability from the leader to step off the platform and sit in a living room.
And speaking of that vulnerability, there's another instruction. They are commanded to offer peace first. Before they offer a critique, before they preach a sermon, before they introduce their grand organizational vision, they offer a blessing of peace.
Peace comes first.
Right. And they are told to look for a person of peace. The research defines this as a relational gateway into the community, an individual who is genuinely receptive, hospitable, and willing to open their own social network to the outsider.
The key contact.
Yes. And then we get to what I think might be the most psychologically challenging part of the whole blueprint. They are told to eat what is set before them.
Ah, gastrodiplomacy.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that this seemingly simple instruction actually triggers a massive reversal of the power dynamic. It forces the incoming missionary or the visiting expert to become a grateful guest rather than an invading savior.
It's brilliant.
You have to physically receive sustenance from the people you came to help before you are allowed to give them anything.
It completely strips away the entitlement and the superiority complex that outside experts almost always carry. When you are eating what is set before you, you are at their table. You are eating their food, prepared their way.
On their terms.
Yeah, you are entirely dependent on their hospitality. That forces your posture into one of profound humility. You cannot act like a conquering hero when you are relying on someone else for your dinner.
Okay, I am tracking with all of this. The patient presence, the vulnerability, the humility. But I have to push back here because there is a jarring element in this Luke 10 passage that seems to contradict everything we just talked about.
Okay, let's hear it.
Jesus also explicitly commands these workers that if a town rejects them, they are to shake the dust off their feet and move on, to just leave.
Yeah.
Now, wait a minute. How do we square that circle? How do we balance this intense mandate to be patiently present, to linger and listen and endure the awkwardness, with this explicit permission to just pack up and bounce? Isn't walking away the ultimate sign of failure? Doesn't that mean you just gave up when things got hard?
That is the exact tension that trips up so many dedicated leaders, and it is a crucial question. Our source material addresses this head-on. It clarifies that in this framework, leaving is not viewed as abandonment, and it is certainly not viewed as failure.
It's not.
No, it is viewed as obedience to reality. It is a vital, necessary component of discernment.
I'm struggling with that. How is leaving a form of discernment?
Because the ultimate goal of the leader is faithful discernment, not stubborn persistence, and those two things are frequently confused.
Oh, I see.
The text warns that leaders, especially highly driven, visionary leaders, often mistake their own stubbornness for faithfulness. They will stay in a community that has clearly, definitively, and repeatedly closed its doors to them.
Why do they do that?
Often out of an internal fear of failure, or a savior complex, or a bruised ego that says, I have to win this town to prove my model works. But the instruction to shake the dust off gives the leader explicit permission to leave without bitterness. It is a harsh but necessary reminder that the worker does not control the harvest. You only control your own obedience and your own posture.
This goes back to the concept of prepared presence mentioned in the notes.
Yes. Prepared presence means entering an environment lightly, dependently, and fully awake to the reality of the situation. You offer peace. If that peace is received, if you find that person of peace, you stay, you unpack your bags, and you invest deeply for the long haul.
But if not?
But if that peace is actively, fundamentally rejected, you have to recognize that the soil is simply not ready, and you have to move on without internalizing it as a personal defeat.
That takes a lot of maturity.
It requires immense, hard-won spiritual maturity to distinguish between a community that is merely cautious and needs more time to trust you versus a community that is actively refusing the peace you are offering. But once that refusal is clear, staying is no longer ministry, it's just harassment.
Wow. Staying is no longer ministry, it's just harassment.
Yeah.
That is a heavy truth. And there's one more specific dynamic from the Luke 10 blueprint that ties into this relief of pressure. The text notes that these 72 workers are being sent ahead of him.
Yes.
They are going into towns that Jesus himself intends to visit later. They are explicitly not the main event.
And for a leader, understanding that is perhaps the most liberating concept in the entire text.
It really is. The research points out that they are merely preparing the space. If you internalize that, it completely shatters the pressure of feeling like you, the individual leader, have to manufacture some massive spiritual transformation.
Or orchestrate a miraculous organizational turnaround all by yourself.
Right. The burden is not on your shoulders to be the savior of the neighborhood. Your job is simply faithful, observant, peace-bearing presence. You are setting the table. The main event comes later.
It fundamentally shifts the focus away from the leader's anxiety over performance and metrics and places the focus entirely on their attentiveness. You are there to discern what is already happening in that community and to prepare the ground. It removes the vanity and the ego from the mission.
Okay, so let's move from the posture of the leader to the mechanics of the community. When these sent witnesses or when any modern leader enters a home or a town with this observant posture, what exactly are they trying to read?
They're looking for the map.
Right. Our sources move into this incredibly deep discussion about navigating what it calls the hidden landscape of culture and power. Because the assertion here is that every single community actually operates on two distinct maps.
The visible map and the invisible map.
Right. The visible shape of a community is obvious to anyone who drives through it. It's the institutions, the elected officials, the public schedules, the organizational charts.
The official structures.
Yeah. If you look at a town, the visible map tells you that power resides with the mayor, the police chief, the school board superintendent, and the chamber of commerce. But beneath that, running parallel to it, is the hidden landscape.
And this is the map that actually governs how the community breathes and functions on a daily basis.
Exactly. This hidden landscape consists of unspoken honor codes, informal family networks, deep historical loyalties, generational memories, and buried traumas.
Our source material offers a wondrously robust definition of culture here. It pushes way beyond the superficial markers of culture. It's not just talking about local cuisine, traditional clothing, or musical preferences.
Right. It's much deeper.
It defines culture as a living web of meaning. It is the invisible, intricate system that teaches a child whom to trust, how to process shame, what situations are considered dangerous, and how true authority actually operates outside of a courtroom.
And in this hidden landscape, trust is the absolute non-negotiable currency of movement.
Without a doubt.
The research is adamant. Without trust, even the most generous, brilliantly conceived, fully funded programs are going to be viewed with intense, paralyzing suspicion. If you do not possess the currency of trust, you cannot buy a single inch of momentum.
And the brutal reality for many leaders is that trust cannot be demanded.
No.
It cannot be fast-tracked through a clever marketing campaign. It has to be painstakingly earned through consistency, through proximity, and through proving over time that you actually understand their living web of meaning.
There's a story in the notes that perfectly crystallizes the danger of ignoring this hidden landscape. It's about a team that moves into a town with the goal of starting a new discipleship training center.
Oh, this one is classic.
It is. They do what any hyperlogical desk-trained planner would do. They study the visible map. They identify the mayor as the key stakeholder. They set up meetings. They pitch the vision. They get the mayor's enthusiastic public approval. And they secure all the necessary municipal permits.
They did everything right on paper.
Everything is greenlit.
Yeah.
It looks like a massive strategic victory. But then launch day comes and goes, and absolutely nothing happens. The community completely ignores the center. The project stalls out, dead in the water.
Because they entirely misread the actual power dynamics of the town.
Exactly. After months of frustration and finally doing the listening they should have done initially, they realized the truth. While the mayor is respected publicly and holds formal administrative capacity, the true trust and moral influence in that town, the actual center of the hidden landscape, lies with a quiet, informal network of older women.
The matriarchs of the town.
Yes. These are the women who organize the meals when someone dies, who quietly mediate the bitter neighborhood disputes, who know the generational history of every family on the block. The town listens to the mayor when it comes to zoning laws, but they listen to these women when it comes to matters of the heart, conscience, and community trust.
The real authority.
Because the team completely bypassed this invisible power structure, their mission was dead on arrival. They literally had to start over, sit in living rooms, build authentic relationships with these women, and earn their trust before a single person in that town would engage with the center.
What's so illuminating about that example is how it proves that visible power is rarely the only power that matters, and very often it's not even the primary power. If a leader wants to learn how to read the hidden landscape, they have to learn to ask radically different questions.
Right, like what?
Well, you don't walk into a room and ask, who holds the title of director? You ask, who is deferred to in silence? When there's a crisis in the neighborhood, whose front porch do people instinctively gather at? What are the hidden social costs, the risk of ostracization or mockery, if a local teenager decides to participate in this new initiative you're launching?
Who is deferred to in silence. I cannot get over how brilliant of a metric that is. You aren't watching the person talking, you're watching the room to see whose reaction the room is checking.
It reveals everything. And the expert analysis in our notes points out that a leader who cannot read the hidden landscape will constantly, dangerously misinterpret the signals the community is sending them.
Give me an example of that.
For example, they will mistake a polite cultural shield for genuine agreement. In many cultures, the web of meaning dictates that you must be impeccably polite and agreeable to a guest. So the community might smile, nod enthusiastically, and say yes to your proposal. The ignorant leader walks away thinking, great, we have 100% buy-in.
But they don't.
No, in reality, the community was just performing cultural hospitality and has absolutely zero intention of participating. Conversely, a leader might encounter hesitation or slow adoption and interpret it as stubborn rebellion or spiritual hard-heartedness, when in reality, the community is just quietly trying to calculate the immense social risk of joining an outsider's movement.
And the hidden landscape also completely changes the meaning of our actual vocabulary. The text highlights how words carry incredibly loaded, localized historical weight.
Right. Context is everything.
You might be working in one neighborhood where the word family evokes profound feelings of absolute safety, fierce loyalty, and protection. It's the ultimate positive trigger word. But if you cross town to a different demographic, maybe one heavily impacted by domestic trauma or systemic foster care issues, the word family might imply stifling control, dangerous obligation, or severe abuse.
The same exact word.
Yes. Or, if you roll in talking heavily about submitting to authority, in a stable suburb, it might mean order and peace. In a marginalized urban center, it might instantly trigger visceral memories of police brutality, corrupt housing officials, and systemic oppression.
Which means the true work of translation is infinitely more complex than just swapping English vocabulary for Spanish or Mandarin. True translation requires a leader to understand the emotional, historical, and traumatic weight behind the local vocabulary.
It's the weight of the words.
Yeah. If you don't understand the history of the hidden landscape, you will use a word that your desk dictionary says means peace, and the community will hear the word threat.
Okay, so let's say you've done the grueling work. You've gotten off the desk, you've sat on the front steps, you've listened until it hurt. You've mapped the hidden landscape of power. You know who the older women are, and you've learned the local grammar.
You've put in the time.
You have built genuine trust. Now, how do you know if your grand, beautiful vision, the thing you actually came to build, is actually workable in their daily lives? This brings us to the critical intersection of feasibility, momentum, and the dangerous trap of what the text calls romantic mission.
This is where the rubber meets the road and where a lot of idealism just goes to die.
It really is.
Yeah.
Our sources make a crucial, paradigm-shifting distinction here. Opportunity is not the same thing as readiness. Let me say that again. Opportunity does not equal readiness.
That's huge.
Just because you look at a community and you can easily identify a massive, visible, spiritual or social need, that does not mean the community is structurally, economically, or relationally ready to sustain the specific intervention model you are proposing.
And confusing those two things, seeing a need and assuming it means they are ready for your specific solution, leads directly into the trap of romantic mission.
Yes, romantic mission. I think every leader has suffered from this at some point. It's this naive, almost cinematic Hollywood belief that if you just have enough pure courage, a passionate enough heart, and a beautiful enough vision, it will somehow magically overcome all the stubborn, structural, and logistical realities of the world.
The whole, if you build it, they will come mentality.
Exactly. Our research violently rejects that notion. It insists that rigorous feasibility testing, actually crunching the numbers, looking at work schedules, analyzing transit routes, is not a sign of weak faith or a lack of passion. It is the definition of wise stewardship.
It goes back to the biblical metaphor of estimating the cost before you begin to build the tower. Passion without logistics is just a recipe for an unfinished tower that becomes a monument to your own poor planning.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text makes a sharp distinction here to help leaders measure this. It distinguishes between motion and momentum.
Motion versus momentum.
Right. Motion is just activity. It's busyness. Momentum is sustainable, forward movement. Think about it like a car. Motion is sitting in your driveway, shifting the car into neutral, and slamming your foot on the gas pedal.
It makes a lot of noise.
The engine is roaring, the RPMs are redlining, it's incredibly loud, it uses up a massive amount of expensive fuel, and it feels like a very intense experience.
Yeah.
But you are going absolutely nowhere. And if you do it long enough, the engine overheats and destroys itself.
Right.
Momentum, on the other hand, is putting the car in drive and letting the transmission actually lock in and connect the power of the engine to the wheels on the pavement. You might move much slower at first, but you are actually traveling forward.
That analogy perfectly captures the burnout epidemic in leadership. When you rev the car in neutral for too long, the engine overheats. That is exactly what leadership burnout is. A team generates massive heat, massive noise, massive activity, but because their transmission, their strategy isn't actually engaged with the cultural reality of the community, the wheels aren't turning, the community isn't changing, and the team eventually just burns out from the friction of going nowhere.
They just collapse.
The text warns that a lot of modern initiatives generate motion, not momentum. You can spend $50,000 on a massive launch event. You can rent a stadium, distribute 10,000 flyers, get a huge crowd for one day, and make a lot of noise. That is motion. But if that event doesn't connect to the mundane, lived reality of those people on a Tuesday morning, it will not endure. It's just a loud engine.
There's a fantastic case study in the notes that illustrates how to pivot from motion to momentum. It details a church planting team that targets a specific urban demographic. On paper at the desk, this demographic looks like a gold mine. It's young, it's highly diverse, the population is booming, the opportunity is undeniably there. But instead of just launching, they do the hard work of feasibility testing. They look at the actual gritty logistics of these people's lives, and they realize something devastating. There is zero readiness for a massive, traditional Sunday morning church service.
Right. Because the feasibility testing reveals the hidden landscape of their schedules. This specific young demographic is entirely built around the gig economy and service
Kind
industry.
of working all the time.
Yeah, they work highly irregular, unpredictable shift hours. They endure massive, exhausting, hour-long commutes across the city. The public transit system they rely on operates on a terrible, reduced schedule on weekends. They are structurally, physically, and economically incapable of sustaining attendance at a traditional, high-production Sunday morning mega gathering.
If the team had pushed forward with the Sunday morning model, it would have been pure romantic mission. They would have revved the engine in neutral and burned out within a year, blaming the neighborhood for being unreachable.
Absolutely.
But the testing also revealed an opportunity. It showed that there was an existing network of informal, organic gathering spaces. Even with their crazy schedules, these people consistently found ways to hang out in intramural sports circles on Tuesday nights, or at very specific local diners and cafes at 11:00 p.m. after their shifts ended.
They found the real rhythm.
Yes. So a wise leadership team looks at that data and pivots. They completely abandon the Sunday morning launch idea. They put the car in drive. They start small, highly flexible discipleship circles that meet in those exact living rooms and cafes at 11:00 p.m., fitting perfectly into the actual rhythms of the people.
And to make that kind of pivot, the text demands that leaders ask very sobering, ego-bruising feasibility questions before they launch anything. You have to ask, can leadership for this initiative eventually be developed locally from within this population, or will it always require imported professionals?
That's a tough question to answer.
It is. Will this project require permanent external oversight and grant funding, or is there a path for it to become economically self-sustaining within the community's means? What exact economic pressures and work schedules dictate when these people can actually afford the time to gather?
It forces you to spend as much time designing the transmission as you do building the engine.
Exactly. And there is a vital distinction made here in the expert analysis regarding timing. The text differentiates between urgency and haste. The mission is urgent. The desire to bring healing or community or the gospel is an urgent desire. But haste is a dysfunction. Haste is letting external pressure like donor expectations or your own ego outrun your discernment. Haste is launching a program before you finish listening just because you want to look productive on a quarterly report. Haste mistakes the noise of movement for actual progress. True urgency, the text argues, is governed by deep love and careful, methodical preparation. You move forward exactly as fast as the speed of local trust will allow, and not 1 mile per hour faster.
Okay, so this brings us to a massive existential question for any leader. Let's say your feasibility testing reveals that your original, brilliant, desk-designed plan won't work, and you realize you are forced to adapt. How do you change your strategy without selling out your core message?
Right, the fear of compromise.
Exactly. How do you adapt to the culture without becoming a spineless chameleon who just tells people whatever they want to hear? This is the realm of adaptive ministry and what the source calls theological elasticity.
This is the ultimate tightrope walk of all contextualization. It is where the most fierce debates in leadership and theology happen.
The text defines theological elasticity as the capacity of an organization or a leader to bend in form without ever breaking in substance. It uses the imagery of a tree in a storm. A healthy, living ministry is like a green, living branch. When the heavy winds of cultural change or economic shifting or logistical reality blow against it, a living branch bends. It has elasticity,
It survives.
right? A dead branch, a rigid wooden rod, cannot bend. It just snaps under the pressure.
But the text is meticulously careful to distinguish elasticity from compromise, because adaptation is almost always feared by purists and traditionalists as a form of compromise. They believe that if you change the time of the meeting or the style of the music or the clothing the speaker wears, you are inherently watering down the truth.
They see any change as a threat.
Yeah. But the source material warns against an opposing, equally dangerous dysfunction, sanctified familiarity.
Sanctified familiarity. We need to unpack that because it is such a perceptive critique of human nature.
It really is. Sanctified familiarity is the profound psychological tendency we all have to cling to a specific method, say, a specific 19th century hymn style, a rigid Sunday morning liturgy, or a very specific corporate boardroom structure simply because it is comfortable, nostalgic, and familiar to the leader.
It's what we know.
Right. But because we don't want to admit we just prefer our own comfort, we baptize our preference. We pretend that our specific culturally derived method is actually sacred divine doctrine. We elevate a temporary cultural preference to the level of eternal mandate.
We make an idol out of it.
The text calls it exactly that, a dangerous idol. It points to apostolic wisdom, specifically the Apostle Paul saying, "I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some." Paul understood that you must constantly change the architecture of the bridge to reach different people, but you must never, ever change the cargo being carried across that bridge.
Okay, I am going to play the hard-nosed purist for a second. Let me push back on this, because I can hear a listener right now shouting at their dashboard. Doesn't adapting to the culture inevitably lead to watering down the hard truths?
It's a fair question.
Think about your own organization right now. If we constantly change the meeting times, soften the vocabulary, tweak the aesthetic, and redesign the architecture just to make people comfortable, aren't we just catering to modern consumerism? Aren't we just offering a highly tailored product designed to meet market demands rather than delivering a prophetic, disruptive truth that is supposed to challenge people?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it is the central haunting anxiety of contextualization. It is a completely valid fear,
Yeah.
but the source material draws a very bright, unyielding line here. True contextualization is not consumer compromise. The text explicitly lists the non-negotiables. It defines the cargo that must never be altered, regardless of how much cultural pressure is applied.
What is on that list?
In the context of the specific Christian framework, the text says the non-negotiables are the absolute lordship of Christ, the final authority of Scripture, the uncomfortable reality of human sin, the absolute necessity of grace, and the radical call to repentance.
Okay, those are the core.
The text is completely unyielding on these points. These are the substance. If a leader decides to soften the reality of sin or quietly remove the call to repentance just to make the audience like them more or to boost attendance, they are no longer contextualizing. They are actively deforming the message.
You snapped the branch, you broke the substance.
Exactly, you've compromised. But what must change, what is entirely negotiable according to the text, are the forms. The meeting times are negotiable, the communication styles, the leadership structures, the cultural illustrations used in a speech, the aesthetic of the gathering space. All of that must be ruthlessly adapted to fit the local reality. The expert analysis here provides a brilliant framing. The goal of true contextualization is to remove unnecessary cultural offenses.
Clarify the difference between a cultural offense and a core offense.
A cultural offense is when someone rejects your message, not because of the message itself, but because of the clumsy, insulting way you delivered it.
Ah, I see.
You don't want a community rejecting the gospel simply because you insisted on delivering it at a time they physically couldn't attend due to work, or because you used a vocabulary word that deeply insulted their local honor code, or because you demanded they assimilate to your middle-class suburban dress code. Those are unnecessary cultural offenses.
Right, they're just barriers you created.
Exactly. True contextualization clears away all of that irrelevant cultural brush so that the true offense of the gospel, the incredibly hard, disruptive truths about human sin, ego, and submitting to a higher lordship can be clearly seen and reckoned with. You remove the offensive packaging, so they have to deal directly with the offensive truth.
Clear away the cultural offense so the gospel offense is unavoidable.
Yeah.
That is a profound distinction. It changes the entire goal of adaptation. So we've gone through this massive, exhausting journey. We've recognized the danger of the desk. We've physically relocated. We've engaged in the spiritual disciplines of seeing and listening.
We've survived loop 10.
Right. We've mapped the hidden power structures of the older women and the local vocabulary. We've done the hard math of feasibility testing to find real momentum. And we've adapted our methods elastically without ever compromising our core convictions. That is a monumental achievement for any leader or team.
It is a lot of work.
But here is the final brutal reality. Ministry, leadership, community development, it is a long game. It outlasts any single individual. People burn out. Leaders get reassigned to different cities. Families move away for aging parents. How on earth do we ensure that all this incredibly hard-won, highly localized, blood, sweat, and tears wisdom doesn't just permanently walk out the front door the day the lead visionary transitions to a new role?
Which brings us to the final discipline outlined in our research. And it is, without a doubt, the most universally neglected discipline in modern leadership.
The crucial role of documentation and strategic revision. The text does something amazing here. It elevates documentation from being a boring, bureaucratic, administrative chore that we all hate doing to the level of a vital spiritual discipline.
It's reframed completely.
It calls documentation an act of supreme stewardship. You are taking private, fragile individual experience and deliberately forging it into permanent institutional memory.
What is not recorded is often lost. The text treats unrecorded human insight as incredibly fragile, because it is.
It is so fragile. Think about it. You spend 3 hours having a massive breakthrough conversation on a front porch with a local elder. You suddenly understand exactly why the neighborhood has been resistant to your project. The light bulb goes on. You think, wow, what a profound insight. I will never forget this. And then 6 months later, life happens and you take a job in another state. You leave.
And the insight goes with you.
Exactly. The text warns against the absolute, preventable tragedy of a brand new leadership team arriving in that neighborhood full of naive energy and proceeding to repeat the exact same painful mistakes that you made 3 years ago. Why? Simply because your brilliant insights lived exclusively inside your own head.
The new team shows up and immediately starts revving the engine in neutral all over again. They burn through another 3 years of trust because there was no map left behind.
Exactly. To prevent this cycle of amnesia, the source material recommends very specific, non-negotiable habits for field workers. It says leaders must keep dedicated field journals. They must force themselves to record summaries of crucial interviews immediately after they happen, not a week later, when the nuance and the body language have faded from memory.
Write it down while it's fresh.
They need to intentionally document their surprises. When did reality forcefully correct your desk-level assumption? Write that down. And crucially, they must actively seek out and capture the voices of the marginalized people in the community who haven't been heard yet. And there was one psychological benefit to documentation that I found totally fascinating. The text notes how rigorous documentation actually protects the leader against overconfidence.
And how does the source define overconfidence in this specific field context?
It defines it as the illusion that a single, highly emotional, powerful anecdote represents the absolute truth of the entire community. It's when a leader has one amazing, tearful breakthrough conversation with one guy at a coffee shop, and the leader rushes back to the board and confidently declares, "I've got it. This is what the whole town thinks. This is the key."
Oh, we've all seen that happen.
Rigorous documentation forces the leader to look at the aggregate data over time. It forces you to step back from the emotional high of one conversation and ask the written record, wait, is this actually a consistent pattern across multiple demographics, or was that literally just one guy's personal opinion?
If we pull back and connect this to the overarching narrative of the source material, the text ties this discipline of documentation directly back to the ancient biblical pattern of remembrance.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Throughout the entire narrative of Scripture, you constantly see God commanding the people to build physical stone altars, to meticulously write down scrolls, to establish highly specific annual feasts and rituals. Why? Because the divine author knows that human beings are profoundly forgetful creatures. We forget our hardest learned lessons, we forget the grace we've received, and we quickly forget the devastating cost of our past mistakes.
We suffer from chronic spiritual and organizational amnesia.
We do. And documentation, The field journal, the debrief report, the mapped landscape is the modern operational equivalent of setting up those ancient stones of remembrance. And the text makes one final profound point about what it calls learning in public.
Learning in public.
When a leadership team builds a culture where they openly document their underlying assumptions, their inevitable failures, and their necessary course corrections, it creates an environment of true communal discernment. You are no longer holding the organization hostage to one charismatic leader's isolated, unquestionable hunch. It strips away the defensiveness and the ego protection that plagues so many executive teams.
It creates accountability.
It allows a group of leaders to sit around a table, look at the written, documented record of their field immersion, and humbly admit, look at the data. Our original strategy is clearly no longer serving reality. The strategy has morphed into a master instead of remaining a servant to the mission. It is time to revise.
And in this framework, strategic revision is framed not as a failure, not as a retreat, but as the ultimate sign of organizational maturity. A constantly revised plan means you are actually paying attention to the living, breathing field.
Exactly. It proves that the mission is actually alive.
So let's take a breath and summarize this massive paradigm-shifting journey we've taken on today's deep dive. We started by confronting the sheer, sterile danger of the desk, how planning from a distance inevitably dehumanizes complex people into data points and creates the seductive illusion of clean solutions.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We explored the necessity of the incarnation as a strategic blueprint, and the spiritual, exhausting disciplines of truly seeing and listening, learning to endure the lingering gaze and hear the hidden story beneath the story.
Right.
We unpacked the Luke 10 blueprint of being sent as a prepared, vulnerable, peace-bearing presence, willing to eat what is served and willing to walk away when the soil isn't ready. We learned how to map the invisible, hidden landscape of unspoken power and cultural trust, discovering who is truly deferred to in silence.
We talked about motion versus momentum.
Yes, we challenged the cinematic trap of romantic mission, learning to test our visions for actual logistical feasibility so we can generate sustainable momentum rather than just loud, exhausting motion. We explored the tightrope of adapting with theological elasticity, bending the cultural branch to remove unnecessary offenses without ever breaking the core, non-negotiable substance of the truth.
And finally, documentation.
Right. We saw how absolutely crucial it is to document this hard-won wisdom, forging private experience into institutional memory so that the mission outlasts the missionary.
It is, without exaggeration, a completely comprehensive framework for tearing down the idol of assumption and replacing it with the hard work of incarnation.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right now as we wrap this up. Whether you are pouring your life into planting a new church, trying to scale a tech startup, running a local political campaign, or just trying to revitalize a broken neighborhood project, you have to internalize this core truth from today's research.
It's vital.
People are never, ever just abstract data points on your flowchart. You cannot lead them effectively from a distance. You cannot love a community from a spreadsheet. You must earn the right to be heard, and that right is only purchased through patient, observant, physically vulnerable presence.
The ground is always speaking. The community is always telling you what it needs and what it fears. But you have to be close enough and quiet enough to actually hear it.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today, building on everything we've unpacked. I want you to think about a project, an initiative, or even a specific personal relationship in your life that feels totally, frustratingly stuck right now. You are sitting in the driveway, your foot is pinned to the floor, you're revving the engine as hard as you can, you're exhausted, but you aren't moving an inch.
You're just making noise.
What if the friction you're experiencing isn't a lack of effort? What if it's not a lack of donor funding or a lack of visionary passion or the need for a sleeker slide deck? What if it is simply a profound lack of proximity? What could fundamentally change in that situation if, before you speak your next word of harsh correction, or before you cast your next grand, sweeping vision from the safety of the front of the room, you just decided to step off the platform, sit down on the front steps, stay quiet, and truly immerse yourself in the murky, complicated, beautiful reality of the people right in front of you? Remember, the X-ray machine is broken. The world isn't clean. You have to step into the muddy waters. Until next time.